Celeste Voss tried to fire me at 9:14 on a Tuesday morning in the executive glass conference room my mother used to call the aquarium. That detail matters. Because the room was built for display. 3 glass walls. 1 wall of white oak. A 12-seat table polished enough to throw people's faces back at them while they lied for a living. The kind of room made for power theater. The kind of room where someone like Celeste loved humiliating people because she thought visibility made her look legitimate. Celeste stood at the far end of the table in a cream suit and a smile too sharp to be called pretty. Adrian Voss, Celeste's father, and my mother's second husband sat to her right pretending solemnity. Which is what weak men do when they think proximity to confidence can substitute for spine. 2 HR executives were there. Graham Pike from legal was there. So were 4 division heads, who had suddenly found urgent reasons to attend a meeting labeled Organizational Realignment. That was Celeste's first mistake. An audience. Celeste slid a folder across the table toward me and said, "Nora Whitmore's role is no longer aligned with the company's future. Not your role. Nora Whitmore's role." She liked using my full name when she wanted to sound official. As if formality could hide malice. As if saying my name like a press release would make what she was doing sound like governance instead of family theft in heels. I looked down at the folder. Termination packet. Prepared in advance. Stamped. Signed. My access badge deactivation time was listed for noon. Celeste hadn't called me in to threaten me. She had called me in to stage my erasure. I looked back up. Celeste folded her hands and kept going like she was reading quarterly numbers, instead of trying to remove the only person in that room who had actually kept Whitmore Biotech from becoming Adrian's vanity vessel. "Nora Whitmore has struggled to adapt to the new leadership model," she said. "And while legacy family connections are appreciated, Whitmore Biotech needs disciplined executives. Note sentimental placement." There it was. Sentimental placement. That was the line that made the room go colder. Not because they pitied me. Because everyone at that table knew exactly who had rebuilt the Regulatory Recovery Unit after the Ohio contamination scare. Everyone knew who had renegotiated the hospital supply network when Adrian nearly lost 3 state contracts, trying to impress investors with an expansion he didn't understand. Everyone knew who had spent the last 4 years fixing what Celeste presented, and Adrian endangered. Me. Nora Whitmore. My mother's daughter. The one they kept just visible enough to use. But never visible enough to threaten the fiction that Adrian's side of the family was now in control. I should tell you, I argued. I didn't. That's what Celeste wanted. A protest. A visible crack. Something she could call instability. Something Adrian could sigh over later and frame as exactly why I had become too emotionally attached to old structures. People like Celeste never just remove you. They bait you into helping them justify the removal. So I opened the folder. Silently. The packet was almost elegant in its cruelty. Redundancy review. Strategic streamlining. Transition support. All the usual corporate phrases cowards use when they need paperwork to do dirty family work. Then I saw the line that changed everything. Authority approved by Acting Successor Office. I read it twice. Not because I didn't understand it. Because I did. Celeste wasn't just trying to fire me. She was firing me as if she were already the heir. That was new. And dangerous. My mother, Miriam Whitmore, had built Whitmore Biotech before Adrian ever touched the building. She had not founded a lifestyle brand. Miriam had built a real company. Research contracts. Clinical manufacturing. Public health logistics. Ugly. Difficult. Regulated work. The kind that doesn't survive on family charm. The kind that only stays alive through precision, trust, and documentation. Miriam Whitmore had also taught me one rule before she got sick. Never fight for your place in the room before you understand who changed the seating chart. So I looked at the signature lines. Celeste Voss. Adrian Voss. A countersign from one terrified HR officer. No signature from my mother. That mattered. My mother had been out of the office for weeks. Officially recovering at the lake house under doctor's orders. with Adrian giving selective updates, and Celeste increasingly speaking in we language about the company's future. I had already suspected they were moving pieces while Miriam was weak. But this was acceleration. Public acceleration. Celeste smiled when she saw me reach that page. She mistook stillness for surrender. That was Celeste's second mistake. I know this may be difficult for Nora Whitmore, she said, turning deliberately to the room instead of speaking to me like a human being. But inheritance of values does not automatically qualify someone for executive relevance. Inheritance of values. Executive relevance. And there it was. My stepsister trying to erase me from my mother's company while speaking as if bloodline were a costume she had already zipped up. Adrian finally joined in. Voice low. Paternal. Nauseating. This is what Miriam would want if Miriam were thinking clearly about scale. If Miriam were thinking clearly. That line sat in the air like poison. Because now I knew exactly how far they had gone. Not just sidelining me. Not just inflating Celeste. They were already translating my mother into past tense while she was still alive. I closed the folder. Slowly. Around us. The glass walls reflected everyone back at themselves. Celeste in cream. Adrian in navy. HR pretending neutrality. Division heads staring at the table because courage is rare in people who like their bonuses clean. I folded my hands over the termination packet and looked directly at Celeste. Then I asked the only question that mattered. Interesting, I said. So who exactly made Celeste Voss the successor? For the first time that morning. Her smile moved. Just a fraction. Enough. Because Celeste didn't know this yet. But the only reason she had ever felt confident enough to try this in front of witnesses was because she thought I was just the daughter who stayed loyal too long. She had no idea I wasn't just Miriam Whitmore's daughter. I was the legal heir Miriam never stopped protecting. And by trying to fire me publicly, Celeste had just chosen the worst possible room to find that out. Celeste Voss had been practicing ownership long before she tried to fire me. That was the real setup. People always think a public humiliation begins in the room where it explodes. It doesn't. It begins in smaller rooms. Hallways. Introductions. Seating charts. Email language. The 1,000 tiny edits people make when they are trying to train everyone around them to accept a lie before they ever state it outright. Celeste was good at that. Not good at building. Not good at regulation. Not good at risk. She had never led a salvage operation. Never sat through a night of legal exposure modeling. Never walked a state contract back from near collapse because someone with a prettier title got sloppy. But she was excellent at atmosphere. Excellent at walking into a room as if it already belonged to her. Excellent at using my mother's illness, like weather, something unfortunate. Yes. But also useful if navigated elegantly enough. When Miriam Whitmore was still in the building every day, Celeste knew better than to overplay her hand. My mother had a way of looking at nonsense that made nonsense want to leave the room on its own. Miriam did not shout. She did not posture. She simply knew where every number lived, who had done the real work, and which smiling frauds were trying to survive on proximity. That kept Celeste contained. Then Miriam got sick. Not suddenly. That would have been easier. She declined in the slow, infuriating way that lets opportunists pretend concern while moving furniture behind her back. At first it was just exhaustion. Then reduced travel. Then remote sign-offs. Then Adrian started saying things like, Miriam wants the younger generation to take more visible initiative. With that careful second husband tone that made him sound humble right up until you noticed he was always speaking in directions that benefited Adrian. The younger generation, that was one of Adrian's favorite little lies. As if Celeste and I were two natural branches of the same tree. No. I was Miriam Whitmore's daughter. I had grown up in lab corridors, boardside rooms, and manufacturing floors, while other girls were learning how to pose in group photos. I knew which vendor contracts nearly sank us in 2016. I knew which state regulators could smell sloppiness in one email. I knew how my mother thought when she was building. When she was testing someone. And when she was done pretending a fool might improve, Celeste learned none of that. She learned posture. She learned wardrobe. She learned how to walk into donor lunches and say, "Our mission," in a voice that made aging men feel flattered for funding things they didn't understand. That difference should have protected me. Instead, it made me easy to recast. Because I stayed close to the work, and Celeste stayed close to visibility. Once Miriam started disappearing from daily operations, Adrian began smoothing Celeste into meetings she had not earned. First as family continuity. Then special strategy presence. Then succession, adjacent leadership support. Which was such a ridiculous phrase I nearly laughed the first time I heard it. No one laughed. Because everyone in that company had already learned the central survival rule of family businesses: absurdity becomes policy the moment enough people repeat it in conference rooms. Meanwhile, my own role shrank on paper while expanding in reality. Classic. I was still the one handling the hard calls. Regulatory cleanup. Contract exposure. State compliance. Internal recovery. If a division got in trouble, it came to Nora Whitmore. If Adrian improvised us into risk, I cleaned it up. If Celeste promised something decorative and impossible to investors, I was the one who had to turn it into something survivable before the damage spread. But publicly, Celeste got brighter titles, better introductions, softer press language. At leadership dinners, Adrian would say, "Celeste is really becoming the face of the next chapter." While I sat there having drafted half the briefing packets he had forgotten to read, at company town halls, Celeste stood beside Miriam's old branding wall in pale suits, talking about protecting the founder's spirit. As if Spirit had ever kept a biotech company compliant through a multi-state contract cycle. The worst part was how deliberate the language became around me. Not dismissive enough to challenge directly. Just reducing. Nora is steady. Nora is reliable. Nora suloyal to Miriam. Nora is best when things get complicated. That last one especially. Best when things get complicated. Meaning useful in disaster. Irrelevant in glory. Celeste never called me weak. She was too smart for that. Instead, she framed me as narrow. Operational. Attached to old models. Too emotionally tied to Miriam's way of doing things. Too deep in the machinery to represent the future. And Adrian helped. Of course he did. Because he had always hated the fact that Miriam never looked at him the way she looked at me when the numbers mattered. She tolerated Adrian. She used Adrian when charm was required. But when the company was bleeding, Miriam called Nora Whitmore. Adrian knew that. Celeste knew it too. That was why they had to change the story before they changed the structure. If people still remembered that I was the person Miriam trusted when things turned dangerous, then Celeste's ascent would always look cosmetic. So they started softening me in public before removing me on paper. Less visibility in investor decks. Fewer speaking roles in executive reviews. More family presence language around Celeste. Less authorship credit around me. Then came the subtler insults. My mother's old assistant, who had worked with her for 15 years, was suddenly reassigned under Celeste for succession training. My standing Friday review with legal got folded into Adrian's office calendar. 2 division heads started routing urgent materials through Celeste first, not because she understood them, but because they had learned where performance power now lived. Whitmore Biotech had not yet been taken from me, but it was being staged away from me. And that is the part nobody sees until it is nearly finished. Erasure rarely starts with a firing. It starts with social rehearsal. The room being trained to accept your diminishing before anyone says it out loud. By the time Celeste stood in the aquarium and slid a termination packet toward me, that room had already been practicing the lie for months. Celeste Voss was the future. Nora Whitmore was leftover loyalty. They thought I hadn't noticed. That was their mistake. I notice patterns for a living. And once I realized Celeste and Adrian weren't just sidelining me but actively rehearsing a succession theft while Miriam was still alive, I stopped trying to protect the family from itself. I started watching. The termination packet was ugly enough. But Celeste wasn't satisfied with removing me quietly. She wanted a spectacle. That was the part that pushed it past internal politics and into something the whole room would remember. Celeste stood at the end of the aquarium table with my termination folder open in front of her and said, "To avoid confusion, Nora Whitmore will surrender building access, company devices, and executive credentials before lunch. Before lunch. Not end of day. Not after council review. Before lunch. Humiliation has a rhythm when people enjoy it. Quick. Public. Irreversible if possible." Celeste wasn't just firing me. She was trying to strip me of status in real time. While witnesses were present. Before anyone could intervene. Graham Pike from legal shifted in his chair. That mattered. Because Graham was not sentimental. But he was careful. And careful men only get visibly uncomfortable when they realize the cruelty in the room is about to create exposure. Celeste noticed Graham's expression and smiled harder. Then she made the second move. She turned to one of the HR executives and said, "Please collect Nora Whitmore's laptop now." Now. Right there. In front of Adrian. In front of legal. In front of division heads who had been working off my crisis models for years and suddenly found it easier to stare at the polished table than at the woman being stripped in public. The HR executive Dana. Nervous. Overpromoted. Trying very hard to appear neutral, actually stood up and reached for my computer. I placed one hand on it. Not possessive. Not emotional. Just enough. Dana stopped. Celeste tilted her head. "All false patience. Nora Whitmore," she said. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." That line almost made me laugh. Because that is the language people use when they've already chosen the hard thing for you and want credit for staying composed while doing it. Then Adrian joined in. Of course he did. He folded his hands and said, in that oily father-by-marriage tone he used whenever he wanted to sound reluctant about something calculated, "This would be easier if Nora Whitmore could behave with some professionalism. There are insults you can dismiss. There are insults that tell you exactly how much contempt has been waiting underneath the etiquette. That one did. Professionalism." From Adrian, who had nearly cost Whitmore Biotech 3 contracts, trying to impress investors with timelines that could not survive regulatory review. Adrian, who used my mother's illness as cover language while moving Celeste into succession conversations she had not earned. Adrian, who had sat across from me, for years benefiting from the labor he kept publicly reframing as difficult, rigid, or too emotionally tied to the founder. And now Adrian wanted to lecture me on professionalism, while Dana from HR stood waiting to take my laptop like I was a temp who had stolen toner. That was already bad enough. Then Celeste took it further. She slid a second document across the table. Not toward me. Toward the division heads. A revised organizational chart. With Celeste Voss listed under executive successor. Office of the Founder's Continuity. And beneath that, my department. Reassigned. To Celeste. That was the insult beyond repair. Not just termination. Replacement. And not just replacement in structure, but replacement in meaning. Celeste wasn't removing me because my role was redundant. She was absorbing my division into her fake succession office so everyone in that room would understand the message. Whitmore authority no longer ran through Miriam Whitmore's daughter. It ran through Adrian's daughter. Through Celeste Voss. Through the woman who had never built the function but now intended to inherit its power. Celeste looked around the table and said, "Going forward, strategic continuity will report through me directly." One of the division heads, Marcus Leone, actually blinked at that. Marcus knew perfectly well Celeste could not read half the regulatory recovery briefs without calling 3 assistants and a dictionary. But Marcus said nothing. That silence enraged me more than Celeste's speech, because rooms like that do not collapse only because of villains. They collapse because of professionals who decide the safest thing is to watch theft become policy while making careful faces. Then Celeste made the moment unforgettable. She looked at Dana from HR and said, "If Nora Whitmore refuses to cooperate, security can escort Nora Whitmore out through the south elevators. I'd rather not have a scene in the main corridor." Security. Escort. South elevators. My mother's company. My mother's building. My mother's conference room. And Celeste wanted me removed through a side exit before lunch, like a contamination event. No one in that room could misunderstand it now. Not legal. Not HR. Not Adrian. Not the division heads. This was not succession planning. This was public degradation. Celeste wanted witnesses. She wanted hierarchy. She wanted the company to see Nora Whitmore reduced in one clean motion, from founder's daughter and executive problem solver, to a body escorted out with a dead badge. I looked at the organizational chart again. Then at the signature block. Adrian Voss. Celeste Voss. No Miriam Whitmore. No board vote. No succession committee notation. Just a family theft pretending to be corporate process. Dana was still standing beside me. Frozen between HR script and common sense, Celeste said. Sharper now. Dana. The laptop. I lifted my eyes to her. Then I asked, in a voice calm enough to make everyone else feel their own pulse, did Celeste Voss really just try to remove Nora Whitmore from Miriam Whitmore's company using a fake succession title and no founder authorization? The room went still. Actually still. Because I had named it correctly. Fake succession title. No founder authorization. Even Graham Pike looked up sharply at that. Celeste's smile faltered for the first time. Just a fraction. Enough. Then she did what's stupid. Arrogant people always do when accuracy corners them. She got louder. Whitmore Biotech is not Miriam Whitmore's personal kingdom anymore. Celeste snapped. And Nora Whitmore is not a princess. The company has to keep on payroll because of blood. There it was. The naked thing. Not performance review. Not restructuring. Contempt. For my mother. For me. For bloodline itself except. Conveniently. When Celeste was trying to wear it, I closed the folder. Folded my hands over it. And in that moment, I knew two things with complete clarity. First, Celeste had just overplayed her hand in front of legal witnesses. Second, she still had no idea who Miriam Whitmore had actually protected in writing. That ignorance was about to cost her everything. I did not argue. That was the first thing that unsettled Celeste. Because she had built the whole morning around a performance. She wanted indignation. She wanted me to stand up too fast. Raise my voice. Accuse Adrian of manipulation. Maybe even throw the folder back across the aquarium table so HR could write words like disruptive and volatile into the record by noon. No. She had prepared for outrage. She had not prepared for silence. I closed the termination packet. I slid the organizational chart back to the center of the table with 2 fingers. Like it was contaminated. Then I looked at Dana from HR and said, Dana. Sit down. Not loudly. Not sharply. Just clearly enough that Dana obeyed before remembering whose side she had been drafted to stand on. That mattered. Because once one person in a rigged room stops moving on command, the rest of the room begins to feel the script slipping. Celeste noticed it too. She leaned one hand on the table and smiled in that brittle way people do when the scene they designed starts refusing them. Nora Whitmore doesn't seem to understand the seriousness of this, she said, turning toward the others instead of speaking to me directly. We're trying to do this respectfully. Respectfully. With security. With a confiscated laptop. With a fake succession title. With my mother still alive and their signatures sitting where hers should have been. I almost admired the nerve. Almost. Instead, I picked up my phone. That got Adrian moving fast. Nora Whitmore, he said, voice tightening. This is not the moment for dramatics. I looked at Adrian. Then at the phone. Then back at him. Adrian Voss wants to discuss dramatics after authorizing security to escort Miriam Whitmore's daughter out a side elevator? That landed. Not because anyone in that room suddenly developed courage, but because accurate language is hard to sit near when you've spent the last 10 minutes hiding inside euphemisms. Graham Pike cleared his throat. A tiny sound. But useful. He was legal. He only made sounds like that when he wanted distance from whatever stupidity had just been spoken aloud. Celeste pushed harder. Of course she did. That is another thing arrogant people do when they feel control thinning. They mistake resistance for proof they should escalate faster. Nora Whitmore's emotional attachment to Miriam Whitmore is exactly why this transition had to happen without consultation. Celeste said, Whitmore Biotech cannot be run like a family shrine. There it was again. Not just contempt for me. Contempt for my mother. Contempt for the company itself. Because Miriam had not built Whitmore Biotech as a shrine, she had built it through brutal, disciplined, regulated work. Every time Celeste framed loyalty to Miriam as sentimentality, she was really telling the room what she thought the company was worth. A symbol. A trophy. A family object. Not a living institution. I kept my voice flat. So Celeste Voss bypassed Miriam Whitmore. Bypassed the board. Invented a successor office. Reassigned Nora Whitmore's division. And called security because Celeste Voss thinks no one in this room can read. Celeste's jaw shifted. Good. Adrian tried to step in again. But I was done letting him set the tone. I stood. Slowly. No slammed chair. No dramatic movement. Just enough to change the angle of the room. And once I was standing, everyone else felt smaller sitting there pretending this was normal. I gathered the documents into one clean stack. Termination packet. Fake org chart. Access revocation list. I straightened the corners precisely. Because nothing unsettles people like Celeste more than watching the person they tried to humiliate become more composed as the insult grows uglier. Then I looked at Graham Pike. Not Adrian. Not Celeste. Graham. Does Graham Pike consider this action valid without Miriam Whitmore's signature? A board vote. Or activation of succession council? The room went silent in a different way then. Not shocked? Exposed. Because that was the first moment the conversation moved fully out of family theater and into corporate liability. Celeste could dominate HR. Celeste could bully division heads. Adrian could drown a hallway in fake authority. But Graham belonged to the record. And people who belong to the record get very uncomfortable when dragged into fiction too early. Graham did not answer immediately. That pause told me enough. Celeste rushed to fill it. This is an internal realignment, she said. Graham Pike doesn't need to. I cut her off. For the first time that morning. Celeste Voss doesn't answer for legal. Small sentence. Big effect. Because everyone in the aquarium had already been behaving as if Celeste's confidence was authority. The second I refused that premise out loud, the room had to confront the possibility that they had all been participating in a bluff. Adrian stood too. Bad mauve. He always became larger physically when he felt smaller strategically. Nora Whitmore will not hijack this meeting, he said. I turned to Adrian with the calmest face I have ever worn in my life. Adrian Voss already hijacked Miriam Whitmore's company. That one hurt him. I saw it. Not because Adrian loved the company. He loved proximity to it. But he knew exactly how many people in that room had privately thought the same thing. Saying it aloud made the thought real. Celeste tried one last push. Nora Whitmore is done here. No. That line was hers 5 minutes earlier. Not now. I picked up my laptop. Not defensively. Decisively. Then I looked at Dana. Dana. Do not touch Whitmore Biotech property again until legal confirms whether Celeste Voss had any authority to issue that order. Dana sat completely still. Good. Then I looked at the division heads. Anyone who received that revised.org chart should preserve the email chain and metadata immediately. Marcus Leone blinked. The other three looked at Graham instinctively. Also good. Because once people start looking past the bully and toward process, The bully is already bleeding power. Finally, I looked back at Celeste. She was still standing at the end of the table in cream, trying very hard to look inevitable. But inevitability is fragile when it has not yet been signed properly. Celeste Voss wanted a room, I said. Now Celeste Voss has one. Then I walked to the glass door. Not to flee, to reposition. I knew exactly where I was going next. Not home. Not to cry. Not to call friends. To the one person outside that room who had been waiting for the Vosses to overreach badly enough to expose themselves in writing, and judging by the look on Graham Pike's face, that moment had just arrived. I opened the door, paused, and turned back once. Do not deactivate Nora Whitmore's access, I said. If anyone touches my credentials before council review, I'll treat it as evidence destruction. Then I left them there. Celeste with her fake title, Adrian with his borrowed authority, HR with their contaminated paperwork, legal with a headache that now had a timestamp. And for the first time all morning, I could feel it clearly. Panic had not reached them yet, but it was on its way. The first layer of truth was structural, not emotional, not symbolic. Structural. People like Celeste and Adrian always assume power lives where it is seen. Title. Office. Seat placement. Who gets introduced first? Who signs the all-hands memo? Who gets to use words like continuity and succession in a room full of nervous executives? That is why Celeste thought a cream suit, a fake org chart, and a termination packet were enough to make Nora Whitmore disappear. She had no idea Miriam built things the opposite way. My mother never trusted visible power unless invisible power supported it first. She used to say, if someone can take your place by moving a chair, then you never owned the room. At 14, I thought she was being dramatic. At 34, I understood she was teaching me inheritance law without calling it that. I didn't go to the parking garage after leaving the aquarium. I went to the founder records office on 42. Most people in the company forgot that room existed, which made sense. It had no view, no branded walls, no executive lighting, just climate-controlled filing cabinets, a private archive terminal, and one locked cabinet Miriam had personally ordered installed the year Adrian married her. That cabinet mattered, not because it held cash or jewels or some melodramatic family secret, because it held control documents. That was how my mother thought. Not in sentiment, in mechanisms. Lena Corbett was there when I walked in. Lena had been my mother's personal governance archivist for 11 years. Which sounds ceremonial until you understand what Whitmore Biotech really was. A private founder-led company with state contracts, layered licensing structures, and enough internal politics to make documentation more important than love. Lena was 63. Unsentimental, impossible to charm, and one of the only people in the building who never started bowing toward Adrian after Miriam got sick. Lena looked up once from the terminal and said, so, Adrian finally let Celeste embarrass herself in writing. That was why I trusted Lena. No pity. No useless outrage. Just pattern recognition. I put the folder from the aquarium on the desk. Termination packet on top. Fake succession chart beneath it. Dana's access list. Celeste's invented office title. Lena scanned the first 2 pages and gave a tiny, joyless laugh. Acting successor office, she said. That's ambitious. Illegal? I asked. Potentially stupid in at least 4 directions. Good. Lena swiveled to the founder archive system. Entered 2 authorization keys. Then pulled open a restricted governance file most of the company didn't know existed. There it was. The first clean layer of what Celeste had never bothered to imagine. Whitmore Founder Continuity Structure. Filed by Miriam Whitmore. Not public. Not board-facing. Not routed through Adrian. Primary operational succession rights in founder incapacity. Nora Whitmore. I didn't blink. Not because I wasn't affected. Because I had known. in instinct, if not in full paperwork, that my mother would never leave Whitmore Biotech structurally exposed to Adrian's vanity or Celeste's costume ambition. Miriam might tolerate performance socially. She would never let performance inherit operating control. Still, seeing it there in hard language did something to me. Not relief. Alignment. Lena opened the deeper attachments. Health trigger contingencies. Voting control transfer conditions. Emergency governance clauses. And the sentence that would eventually kill Celeste's fantasy before noon. No spouse, stepchild, or non-lineal family affiliate may exercise succession authority absent written founder activation or successor declination by Nora Whitmore. Stepchild. There it was. Not implied. Named. Celeste had just tried to fire the only legal successor using an office title she could not lawfully hold. Under founder conditions that had never been activated for Adrian or his daughter. I leaned back. Slowly. Lena glanced over. Nora Whitmore wasn't told? Miriam told Nora Whitmore enough? I said. Not the wording. Lena gave me a look. Only older, competent women know how to give. Half respect. Half, of course, Miriam did it that way. Your mother was waiting for them to become reckless. Lena said. Yes. That sounded exactly like Miriam. Not because she enjoyed family destruction. She hated mess. But she understood something people mistake for coldness when it is really intelligence. If you expose certain people too early, they become careful. If you let them believe they're winning, they document themselves. That was the second layer of truth. My value to Whitmore Biotech wasn't just historical. It was legal. Not sentimental founder's daughter value. Not honorary bloodline value. Not Miriam's loyal Nora value. Which was the watered-down frame. Adrian loved because it made me sound emotionally adjacent instead of structurally central. Real value. Triggered authority. Protected succession rights. Founder-specific continuity control. Celeste had mistaken me for a removable executive. But under Miriam's real architecture, Nora Whitmore was the lock on the entire inheritance mechanism. Lena opened another attachment. This one hurt more. Not because it surprised me. Because it confirmed my mother had seen farther ahead than I had wanted to. A sealed memo from Miriam Whitmore. Dated 9 months earlier. After the second board dinner, where Adrian publicly floated future-facing family leadership language. I knew that dinner. I remembered every fake smile in the room. Miriam's memo was brief. Sharp. Almost surgical. If Adrian Voss or Celeste Voss attempt unilateral title transfer, leadership reassignment, or successor positioning without founder activation, preserve record and escalate through successor council. Nora Whitmore must not be cornered into reactive conduct. I stared at that sentence for a long time. Because that was my mother. Even sick? Even partially removed from daily visibility. She had still been protecting me. Not just with authority, but with instruction. She knew exactly what Adrian and Celeste would try. She knew they would go public before they went lawful. She knew Celeste would mistake humiliation for proof of power. And Miriam. Somehow. I still trusted me not to break first. That was the third layer. I was not just Miriam's heir on paper. I had been raised for this specific kind of war. Lena printed 3 documents. Founder continuity structure. Restricted succession clause. Miriam's escalation memo. Then Lena placed them in a black folder and slid it across the desk to me. Nora Whitmore has 2 choices now, she said. No, I replied. Nora Whitmore has one? Lena nodded. Correct. Because once you know exactly where authority lives, there is no moral confusion left. Only timing. I took the folder and stood. On the way to the door, Lena said. Graham Pike already called Succession Council. I paused. Lena added. Celeste Voss isn't the only one who understands escalation. Good. Very good. Because somewhere above us, In the aquarium. Celeste still thought I had stepped out in silence because I was stunned. She was wrong. I had stepped out to retrieve the part of the company she never knew existed. And once I walked back in with Miriam's actual architecture in hand, the morning was going to stop being a firing. It was going to become a succession event. When I walked back into the aquarium, Celeste was still standing at the end of the table, like the room belonged to her. That was almost impressive. Almost. Because it meant she still didn't know. She had escalated hard enough to humiliate me in front of HR, legal, and division leadership. But she had not yet asked the only question that mattered. What had Miriam Whitmore actually put in writing? That ignorance was now the most expensive thing in the room. I carried a black folder. Nothing dramatic. No speech ready. No shaking hands. No visible anger. That unsettled Adrian first. He had been hoping I would either storm out or come back emotional. He understood how to handle outrage. He had spent years converting female anger into evidence of instability. But me returning calmer than before, with a folder he hadn't seen, forced him into the one state he hated most. Uncertainty. Celeste noticed it too. She crossed her arms and said, "Good. Nora Whitmore is back. Dana can finish collecting devices." No. That line had less authority now than she realized. I set the black folder on the table. Not in front of me. In the center, where everyone could see it. Then I looked at Graham Pike. Succession Council has already been notified. Correct? That got the room. Not because anyone spoke. Because no one expected me to use the word succession first. Graham's face changed by half an inch. That was enough. Celeste glanced at Adrian. Adrian glanced at Graham. Dana from HR looked like she wanted to evaporate into the carpet. I opened the folder. First page. Founder continuity structure. Second page. Restricted succession clause. Third page. Miriam's escalation memo. I slid the first document toward Graham. Not Adrian. Not Celeste. Graham. Please read the highlighted section aloud. I said. Celeste laughed once. Sharp. Dismissive. Wrong. This is ridiculous, she said. Whitmore Biotech is not a monarchy. I turned to her. No. Which is why Celeste Voss should have been more careful before inventing a crown. That one hit? Two division heads looked down instantly. Marcus Leone actually pressed his lips together to stop a reaction. Adrian's face darkened. Celeste's expression tightened around the edges. Graham read. Quietly at first. Then louder. Because he realized the room needed to hear it clearly. Primary operational succession rights in founder incapacity. Nora Whitmore. Silence. Ard silence. The kind that has weight. Celeste blinked once. Then twice. That was the first visible crack. Adrian recovered faster. Which made sense. He had lived longer inside deception and knew reflexively that denial buys time. That's old internal language. Adrian said. Miriam never finalized. I slid the second document to Graham. Keep reading. Graham did. No spouse. Stepchild. Or non-lineal family affiliate may exercise succession authority absent written founder activation or successor declination by Nora Whitmore. There it was. Stepchild. Named. Not implied. Not arguable. Celeste had just tried to fire the legally protected successor from Miriam Whitmore's company using a title she could not hold. Under authorities Adrian did not possess. In front of legal witnesses. Now the panic started. Not theatrically. Better. Celeste's chin lifted too high. Adrian reached for the papers too quickly. Dana sat down without being told. One division head quietly pushed the fake organizational chart farther away from his own side of the table. Like contamination had become visible. Celeste made the mistake arrogant people always make when the floor drops under them. She got louder. Miriam told Celeste about continuity planning years ago. She snapped. Miriam said Celeste would be protected. Protected. Interesting word. I nodded once. Protected from what? I asked. Consequences? That landed with a thud. Because even now, she was telling on herself. Not talking about authority. Not talking about board process. Not talking about legal structure. Talking about what Miriam supposedly promised her personally. That is how fraud reveals itself. It reaches for comfort language when power language fails. Adrian tried to seize the papers. Graham stopped him with one hand. Small motion. Massive effect. Because Graham was legal, and once legal physically blocked Adrian Voss from touching the founder continuity documents, everyone in that room understood the balance had shifted. Adrian said, too carefully. This doesn't change the immediate need for organizational streamlining. No. That was another terrible move. I pulled the termination packet back toward me and placed it on top of the black folder. Then I looked around the room. At Dana. At Marcus Leone. At the other division heads who had sat through my humiliation and hoped not to be required morally. At Graham Pike. At Celeste. At Adrian. And I said, very clearly, Celeste Voss attempted to terminate Nora Whitmore under fake successor authority. Without founder signature. Without board activation. And in direct violation of the continuity structure Miriam Whitmore filed. No one challenged that sentence. Because no one could. The facts were now lined up too cleanly. Celeste's fake title. My termination packet. The access revocation. The security order. The reassigned division. And over all of it, Miriam's documents naming Nora Whitmore as the actual successor. That is when Celeste finally understood the size of the mistake. I watched it happen in real time. First confusion. Then disbelief. Then the ugly, naked fear of someone realizing the person she tried to degrade in public was not just her stepsister. I was the Hinga. The protected line, the person Miriam had trusted when the company needed continuity in law. Not performance in heels. Celeste sat down. She didn't mean to. I think. Her knees simply gave up the illusion before the rest of her did. Adrian did not sit. He was too proud for that. But he stopped speaking for just long enough to betray the truth. He had known there were documents. He just hadn't known I could reach them, before he and Celeste finished the takeover. Graham Pike closed the folder. Then he said the sentence that finished the escalation. No one is deactivating Nora Whitmore's credentials. Effective immediately. All succession-related actions by Adrian Voss and Celeste Voss are frozen pending council review. Frozen. That word changed everything. Because now Celeste wasn't the acting successor, she was the subject of review. Adrian wasn't the steady second husband guiding transition. He was a man standing too close to attempted corporate fraud. I gathered the papers. Calmly. Then I gave the final instruction. Preserve every email chain. Metadata trail. An access log tied to this meeting. I said, if anything disappears, Nora Whitmore will treat it as intentional destruction of founder governance evidence. No one moved. Good. Because now they all understood. This morning was no longer a firing. It was a failed coup. And Celeste had launched it against the one person Miriam had already armed for exactly this kind of war. The public reveal happened 40 minutes later in the founder briefing hall. Not in the aquarium. That mattered. Because Celeste had tried to humiliate me in a glass conference room full of controlled witnesses. HR. Legal. Division heads. Contained people. Useful people. People trained to freeze when family power started behaving badly. I wanted the correction somewhere larger. Somewhere impossible to bury. Every Tuesday at 11. Whitmore Biotech held the founder operations briefing in the lower hall department heads. Compliance leads. Legal. Research management. Manufacturing oversight. Investor relations. And whoever else had suddenly decided the company's future was interesting that week. Miriam had started the tradition years ago, because she believed the company should hear hard truths in one room, not diluted through hallway mythology. Celeste hated those briefings. Too many real operators, too many numbers, too little space for decorative leadership, which is why the reveal belonged there. By the time I walked into the hall, Graham Pike had already frozen the fake succession action. Dana from HR looked like a woman reconsidering every email she had forwarded that morning. And Adrian was trying very hard to pretend there had merely been a misunderstanding around process. No, there had been an attempted theft, and now everyone was going to watch it lose shape in public. The founder hall was half full when I arrived. White walls, tiered seating, one long presentation screen, no chandeliers, no softening decor, just fluorescent honesty, and people who knew enough about the business to recognize fraud when it wore executive language too loosely. Marcus Leone was already there. So was the regulatory director? Sonia Barrett. So was half the manufacturing leadership team. Good. Those were not social witnesses. Those were operational witnesses. They knew what Whitmore Biotech actually ran on. Celeste came in 2 minutes later with Adrian at her side. Still in cream. Still trying to carry the morning like it had only bruised weaker people. But her eyes were sharper now. Faster. She had finally begun calculating the possibility that the room ahead would not be as obedient as the room behind glass. Graham stood near the front. Also good, because once legal chooses the room, the event stops being gossip. It becomes record. The briefing started badly for Adrian. He tried to take the lectern before anyone had settled. With that smooth second husband gravitas he liked to wear when Miriam wasn't there to make him sound smaller. Before we begin, Adrian said, there's been some temporary confusion regarding transition authority. And I want to assure everyone, Nora Whitmore would like the actual document shown. Graham Pike said. Beautiful. No drama. No permission. Just a sentence that cut Adrian off at the knees. Every head in the room turned toward me. Not Celeste. Not Adrian. Me. That was the first shift. I stepped forward with the black folder in hand, placed it on the lectern myself, and looked out at the room. Faces I knew. Faces that had watched me pull regulatory fires out of walls while Adrian gave speeches over the ashes. Faces that had probably suspected plenty. Faces that now needed clarity more than diplomacy. So I gave them clarity. This morning, I said, Celeste Voss attempted to terminate Nora Whitmore under an office title Celeste Voss does not legally hold. Silence. Then movement. Not chaos. Better. People sitting straighter. Sonia Barrett crossing her arms. Marcus Leone leaning forward. A low murmur from the left tier where manufacturing ops sat. The room wasn't shocked because Celeste was cruel. The room was shocked because she had finally put the cruelty in writing. I opened the first document under the projector camera. Founder continuity structure. Miriam Whitmore's filing. Highlighted line. Primary operational succession rights in founder incapacity. Nora Whitmore. The room changed. Actually changed. You could feel the pressure move. All those months of Celeste's posturing. Adrian's soft language. The fake future tense positioning. The younger generation nonsense. All of it suddenly had something to crash against. Not rumor. Not emotion. Structure. Adrian stepped toward the lectern. Graham Pike stopped him with a single lifted hand. Again. Small motion. Massive effect. I turned the page. Restricted succession clause. Highlighted. No spouse, stepchild, or non-lineal family affiliate may exercise succession authority absent written founder activation or successor declination by Nora Whitmore. This time the reaction came out loud. Someone behind Sonia said, Jesus. Marcus Leone exhaled like he'd been waiting months to do it. Dana from HR, now seated in the back row, physically looked down at her own lap. Celeste went white so fast, it almost made the cream suit seem cruelly chosen. Stepchild. Named. That one word did more damage than any speech ever could. Because Celeste's entire bluff had depended on vagueness. Family. Continuity. Next chapter. Shared future. Adrian loved that same language, because it let him drift close to founder power without ever having to state the mechanism. Now the mechanism was on the screen. And Celeste was not in it. I held up the termination packet next. For context, I said, this was issued to Nora Whitmore under Acting Successor Office Authority. Then I placed the fake organizational chart under the camera. There it was on the big screen for the whole company to see. Celeste Voss installed as executive successor over divisions she had never built. Signed by Adrian Voss. Unsupported by founder authorization. In direct contradiction of Miriam Whitmore's filed continuity structure. That was the reveal. Not that Nora Whitmore was important. Everyone serious already knew that. The reveal was that Celeste and Adrian had tried to convert performance into inheritance while Miriam was still alive and had tried to remove the actual successor before the company could see the founder's real design. Celeste finally broke. This is manipulative, she said. Voice too high. Too quick. Miriam meant to update those documents. No? I said. Not loud. Just final. Then I looked directly at Celeste in front of the entire company and finished what Miriam had already written, long before Celeste tried to stage a coup in glass. Miriam Whitmore already decided who the heir was. Celeste Voss just didn't know Nora Whitmore still had the paperwork. And once that sentence landed, the room stopped seeing Celeste as the future. It started seeing her correctly. As a woman who had tried to fire the real heir from her own mother's company and lost, Celeste collapsed in stages. That is how people like her always fall. Not cleanly. Not all at once. First the face. Then the voice. Then the authority. Then, finally, the room. The founder hall went dead quiet after I said it. That sentence did not need decoration. It had done exactly what it needed to do. It had moved the room out of speculation and into structure. Everyone in that hall now understood the same thing at the same time. Celeste had not just overstepped. She had tried to remove the protected successor while standing on power she never legally held. And once a room understands that, politeness starts withdrawing fast. Celeste tried to recover first. Of course she did. She laughed. But the sound was wrong now. Thin. Sharp. Desperate in a register she had probably never heard in her own voice before. These are outdated contingency papers, she said. Miriam intended to modernize the structure. Everyone here knows Whitmore Biotech can't be run on some old founder fantasy. No one answered. That was her real collapse. Not my documents. Not Graham Pike's intervention. The room refusing to follow her back into narrative, because 15 minutes earlier, Celeste had still been performing inevitability. A future everyone was expected to accommodate. A cleaner, younger, more camera-friendly continuation of the Whitmore name. But now the company had seen the actual filing, the actual clause, the actual attempted takeover. And Celeste's voice no longer sounded like leadership. It sounded like someone trying to talk over evidence. Adrian stepped in next. Badly. He had always mistaken volume control for authority. He moved closer to the lectern and said, "We are not going to let internal family language disrupt the continuity of this company." Internal family language. There was something almost beautiful about how stupid that was. Because the company was not looking at family language. The company was looking at governance documents signed by Miriam Whitmore. The company was looking at a termination packet issued by Celeste under a fake title. The company was looking at a reassignment chart that illegally transferred my division under invented authority. The company was looking at attempted fraud dressed as succession. Sonia Barrett stood up first. That mattered. Sonia didn't work in image. She worked in regulatory enforcement. She had spent years cleaning up after executives who believed confidence was a substitute for structure. Sonia looked at Adrian, The way my mother used to look at contaminated samples. Then Sonia said, "Did Adrian Voss authorize a termination under authority Adrian Voss did not possess?" No one in the room missed how she phrased it. Not was there confusion. Not should we clarify this later. Did Adrian authorize it? That was the shift from scandal to liability. Marcus Leone followed immediately. Was Nora Whitmore's department reassigned under fake succession language? Then Lila Chen from manufacturing. Then Jeffrey Morales from compliance. Question after question. Not emotional. Not theatrical. Precise. Who approved the action? Who authorized the title? Did Miriam sign anything? Was the board informed? Was HR told the founder continuity clause existed? Who generated the chart? Who instructed security? That was the sound of Celeste losing the room. Not boos. Not gasps. Question. Questions are lethal to fraud because questions require documents. And documents are where fraud always gets slower than the truth. Celeste made one last mistake. She pointed at me. Actually pointed. Me. Miriam Whitmore's daughter. In a room full of senior company leadership. And said, "Nora Whitmore is weaponizing illness and bloodline because Nora Whitmore can't compete in the future." That line should have helped her. It destroyed her. Because everyone in that room knew who had actually done the difficult work. Everyone knew who kept Whitmore Biotech standing, while Adrian drifted and Celeste posed. Everyone knew who worked through the contamination scare. The contract crisis? The recovery sequence. The regulatory restructure. Nora Whitmore did. So when Celeste tried to frame me as sentimental and obsolete, the room finally saw the full ugliness of it. She had not only tried to steal the future, she had built the attempt on years of pretending the most competent person in the company was merely the founder's emotionally attached daughter. Graham Pike stepped to the front and spoke in the flat, exact tone legal people use when a disaster becomes official. Effective immediately. He said, "All actions taken this morning under the title Acting Successor Office are void." There. Void. One word. Fatal. Celeste's posture changed. It was subtle. But I saw it. So did everyone else. The shoulders tightened. The chin dropped a fraction. The confidence stopped projecting outward and began folding inward. The way it always does when arrogance realizes process has entered the room with sharper teeth than vanity expected. Graham continued. Pending full board review and founder council escalation. Adrian Voss and Celeste Voss are suspended from succession-related authority. Executive reassignment action. And personnel decision. Suspended. Another clean word. No screaming needed. No spectacle needed. Just record. Adrian actually took a step forward like he might object. But then three things happened almost at once. Dana from HR slid the termination packet away from Celeste. Marcus Leone picked up the fake org chart and handed it directly to legal. And security, real security this time. Not the decorative threat Celeste had tried to use on me, appeared at the rear doors at Graham's request. Not for me. For them. That was the moment the hierarchy inverted in public. Celeste saw the guards and went pale. "Are you serious?" she said. No one answered. Adrian tried one last appeal to status. "This is still a family matter." "No," I said, and the whole room listened. This stopped being a family matter when Adrian Voss and Celeste Voss tried to seize Miriam Whitmore's company before Miriam Whitmore was finished living. That line ended him. .com. You could feel it. Adrian's face emptied. Not of shame. He didn't have enough character for shame to arrive first. Of cover. The room no longer saw Adrian as Miriam's husband navigating a difficult transition. The room saw him correctly. As a man who had mistaken temporary access for inheritance. Celeste sat down hard. Not gracefully. Just hard. And for the first time all morning, she looked exactly what she was. Not a successor. Not a future founder. Not a strategic leader. Just a woman in a cream suit who had tried to humiliate the wrong person in the wrong room and discovered too late that Nora Whitmore wasn't the weak link in Miriam Whitmore's company. I was the line she built the company to survive through. The first thing I took back was not the title. It was the room. That mattered more. Because titles can be granted quietly, revised later, polished for press, softened in newsletters, made to sound generous. Rooms are harder. A room either bends toward you or it doesn't. And that morning, in the Founder Hall, after the documents were read and Celeste went pale in public, and Adrian lost the language of inevitability, Whitmore Biotech stopped orienting around them. It oriented around me. Not because I raised my voice. Because I no longer needed to. Graham Pike stepped back from the lectern after freezing the fake succession action. And for one strange, clean second, no one moved. Not Celeste. Not Adrian. Not HR. Not the department heads who had just watched a failed internal coup collapse under Miriam's own paperwork. Then Sonia Barrett did something small that changed everything. She turned in her seat, looked directly at me, and asked, "What do you want operations to do next?" Nora Whitmore? There. That was the restoration. Not theoretical inheritance. Not family sentiment. Comment. And because Sonia asked it in front of everyone, the whole company got to watch the answer appear in the place where Celeste had tried to create absence. I didn't rush. I walked back to the lectern, set my hand on the edge of it, and said, "First, no one follows a single instruction issued under the so-called acting successor office. That structure never existed legally. Second, all department heads preserve every communication from Adrian Voss and Celeste Voss related to reassignment, leadership transition, or founder continuity. Third, all strategic, compliance, and personnel escalations route through Nora Whitmore pending council review." No one challenged any of it. Marcus Leone nodded immediately. Lila Chen opened her laptop right there. Jeffrey Morales from compliance was already forwarding meeting invites to my office before I had even finished the sentence. That was the second thing I took back. The flow. Because power in a company is not just who gets introduced first. It is where decisions start moving when people smell risk. For months, Adrian and Celeste had been trying to reroute the company around me to make me look like sentimental old wiring while they floated newer wire. Prettier current through the building. Now the system corrected itself in real time. Back to me. Back to the line Miriam had built to survive them. Dana from HR approached next. Poor Dana looked like a woman who had discovered too late that obedience is not the same thing as safety. She handed me the termination packet. Not ceremoniously. Not with apology. Just both hands. Eyes lowered. Like the paper itself had become evidence of something dirty. I took it, opened it once more, then crossed out the signature line and wrote in large, clear block letters across the first page. Void issued without authority. I handed it back to Dana. File it exactly as marked. I said. Dana nodded too fast. Good. Because that is another thing about restoration. You do not just take back your place. You rewrite the record where they tried to erase it. Celeste finally stood again. Bad choice. She looked wrecked now. But not in a way that invited pity. More like a mirror had been held too close for too long. The cream suit still fit. The hair was still perfect. But inevitability had left her. And once inevitability leaves people like Celeste, what remains is often embarrassingly small. This isn't over, Celeste said. I turned to her and gave her the truth without flavoring it. For Celeste Voss. It is. The room heard that. And more importantly, the room believed it. Because now they had context for every prior month, every email that suddenly copied Celeste, every donor dinner where Adrian talked about the next chapter, every meeting where my title got smaller while my workload got heavier. All of it had been preparation. Social rehearsal for a succession theft that had now failed in front of legal. Operations. Compliance. HR. And half the company's real spine. Adrian tried one last time. He always believed there was one more hallway conversation that could save him. One more lowering of the voice. One more paternal angle. He stepped toward me after the hall started emptying and said, "Nora Whitmore, let's not make permanent enemies out of family." No. That line was dead too. I looked at Adrian and said, Adrian Voss already did that when Adrian Voss mistook Miriam Whitmore's illness for an opening. That stopped him completely. Because there are moments when a person finally hears themselves accurately. Not as they intended to sound, but as the structure of their actions has made them. Adrian had spent months telling himself he was protecting continuity. Helping Celeste. Easing transition. Managing instability. Now he had to hear the truth in one clean sentence. Opening. That was what Miriam's sickness had been to him. Opening. And he knew it. I left the Founder Hall with Graham Pike, Sonia Barrett, and Marcus Leone at my side, not dramatically. Not like an entourage. Just in the natural gravitational way, institutions reveal who they trust once performance breaks apart. On the way back upstairs, the executive assistant at reception looked up and said, "Should I reroute the noon leadership review to Nora Whitmore's office?" Not "Do you still want it?" Not "Are you allowed?" Just logistics. Yes. That was the third thing I took back. My mother's company stopped asking whether I belonged in command and started asking where to send the meetings. By noon, my access had not been deactivated. Celeste's had been restricted. Adrian's calendar privileges were frozen. The fake succession office had disappeared from the server. And in my inbox sat a short message from Founder Council. Subject line: Successor confirmation received. I stared at it for a long moment. Not because I doubted what it meant. Because for the first time since Miriam got sick, the company was no longer operating inside Adrian's version of the future, or Celeste's wardrobe-based fantasy of power. It was operating inside Miriam Whitmore's actual design. And right at the center of that design, exactly where they had tried to create a vacancy, was me, Nora Whitmore. Not leftover loyalty. Not sentimental blood. Not an executive they could march out a side elevator. The real heir. 3 weeks later, Whitmore Biotech no longer looked like Adrian's transition project or Celeste's fantasy inheritance. It looked like my mother's company again. That was the real ending. Not revenge for its own sake. Restoration of structure. People love the dramatic moment. The fake firing. The public reveal. The collapse in front of witnesses. And yes, those moments matter. They are satisfying because humiliation had been weaponized first. And there is justice in making the weapon break in the wrong hands. But the real victory came afterward. In what stayed. In what did not go back. In the fact that once the documents came into daylight, the company could no longer be run as a family costume. Adrian was removed from all transitional authority within 48 hours. Not because Adrian apologized. He never really did. He sent one careful email about regrettable escalation and shared family stress under founder uncertainty. Which is exactly the sort of language a weak man uses when he still hopes phrasing can survive where character has failed. It couldn't. The board froze Adrian's access to executive approvals, founder communications, and strategic planning materials. Outside counsel opened a formal review into unauthorized succession conduct and attempted personnel action under false authority. Adrian stopped coming into the building after that. Good. Whitmore Biotech had already spent too many years making room for his posture. Celeste lasted even less time. She tried one final social media-style maneuver first. Of course. She framed herself to a few investors as a younger leader shut down by legacy resistance. Pathetic. That angle might have worked in fashion, politics, or some glossy family office where image was the product. It did not work in biotech compliance. Not after half the company had watched Celeste try to strip Nora Whitmore publicly under a title she never had. Celeste was formally banned from all internal authority reviews by the end of the week. No more continuity office. No more executive briefing access. No more founder-level introductions. No more reheated language about the future. Just Celeste Voss. Outside the structure at last. Exactly where she should have remained from the beginning. As for me, I did not inherit a throne. I inherited responsibility. That distinction mattered to Miriam. So it mattered to me. Founder Council completed the activation review. Miriam's continuity structure was formally recognized. The board recorded it. Legal circulated it. The executive leadership directory was updated. Not with some sentimental announcement about a daughter stepping into her mother's legacy, but with the kind of dry language I trust now. Nora Whitmore. Activated successor. Founder continuity structure. Interim executive authority pending founder recovery review. Clean. Correct. Unromantic. Perfect. That was how I wanted it. Not princess returns. Not family victory. Not rightful blood restored. Just the record telling the truth after too many people had worked too hard to keep it from doing that. My mother came back to the office 6 days after the review closed. Not full-time. Not dramatically. Miriam Whitmore did not sweep into the building to hug me in front of the staff and bless the outcome with some cinematic speech. That would have been easier for everyone else. Easier to turn into myth. Easier to misunderstand. Instead, she came into my office in a gray coat, sat down across from me, and asked for the full briefing packet. No greeting first. No sentimental détour. Just work. I handed it over. She read for 12 straight minutes without speaking. Adrian's unauthorized signatures. Celeste's fake title. The attempted firing. Graham Pike's freeze. The activation documents. The leadership responses. The investor notes. Every ugly little effort made while she was sick enough to be useful to cowards. When Miriam finally looked up, she only said one sentence. Nora Whitmore took longer than Miriam expected. I almost smiled. Almost. That was my mother's version of pride. I answered honestly. Nora Whitmore wanted to be sure. Miriam nodded once. Good. Then she stood. Walked to the glass wall of my office. Looked out over the operations floor. And said, Now make sure Whitmore Biotech never gets this vulnerable to family performance again. That was the blessing. Not warmth. Trust. So I did. I restructured founder continuity access rules. I removed informal family visibility from executive designation pathways. I forced every strategic approval back through documented channels. I separated relational proximity from authority. I made it impossible for another Adrian Voss to drift close to power through marriage. I made it impossible for another Celeste Voss to audition for inheritance with wardrobe and timing. And, maybe most importantly, I stopped letting the company confuse quiet with weakness. That was the new order. Nora Whitmore no longer stayed late cleaning up after people who publicly minimized Nora Whitmore. Nora Whitmore no longer softened the truth so fragile egos could digest it politely. Nora Whitmore no longer protected the dignity of people who had tried to weaponize family against structure. Whitmore Biotech stabilized fast after that. Funny how quickly a company calms down when the competent person is no longer being treated like removable support. The leadership meetings got shorter. The compliance calls got cleaner. The fake future language disappeared. People started bringing me the real problems first. Not the polished versions after Adrian or Celeste had made them worse. And the aquarium? I kept it. Same glass walls. Same polished table. Same white oak. But I changed one thing. I had the room name removed from internal scheduling and replaced with this. Founder Continuity Room. Not for sentiment. For memory. Because people forget too easily when humiliation fails. They like to skip to the part where the right person ends up in charge and pretend the ugly middle was just confusion. No. It was theft. It was arrogance. It was a public attempt to remove Nora Whitmore from Miriam Whitmore's company by people who mistook visibility for right. That never gets to become confusion. That stays named. Celeste Voss tried to fire me from my mother's company because she thought I was just the daughter who worked too hard and stayed too quiet. Adrian backed her because he thought illness had created an opening. They were both wrong. Nora Whitmore was not the leftover piece of Miriam Whitmore's era. Nora Whitmore was the line Miriam built the company to survive through. And once that truth came into the light, everything false had to leave with it.